Have you ever asked yourself what separates the lives of the ordinary from the extraordinary? Not in vague, comforting platitudes, but in the raw, unflinching mechanics of thought, of action, of will? Have you ever stared into the mirror at night when the world is silent and the mind is loud and wondered why your desires remain distant shadows while others seem to bend reality to themselves with terrifying ease? I asked myself this question 30 days ago, standing at the crossroads of desperation and ambition, and I chose to take a path few dare to walk, the path of absolute mental allegiance to one principle, one law whispered through the decades by Napoleon Hill himself, the law of definiteness of purpose. For 30 days I became an experiment in self-mastery, a crucible of desire tempered by reason, curiosity fused with restraint. I promised myself I would not cheat, not once, not in thought, word, or deed. And as the days unfolded, I began to understand a truth far darker and more luminous than I had imagined. Success is never given. It is forged within the unseen recesses of your mind, and it is never without cost. From the moment I committed to this law, I realized I was not merely testing a principle, I was confronting the deepest fractures of my own psyche. Napoleon Hill teaches us that the human mind, when saturated with a burning desire and an unwavering faith, can summon forces invisible, almost supernatural, into tangible reality. But the Stoic within me whispered constantly, desire is volatile. Passion without discipline is fire that consumes the self before it warms the world. Do not mistake the storm for the ship. So I began my experiment with the dual consciousness, the alchemist of ambition and the sentinel of reason. Each morning I awoke to affirmations, to visualizations so vivid that my imagination felt like a co-conspirator of the universe. I saw myself achieving what I had only whispered in the dark, every detail etched with precision, every emotion aligned with certainty. Yet, every evening, I examined my day with the meticulous detachment of a Stoic scholar, questioning not only my actions but the very impulses that drove them. Were they born of authenticity, or merely the hunger for recognition, for the fleeting thrill of imagined victory? The first week was the most deceptive. Desire surged like a wild river, dragging me toward small victories and illusions of progress. I imagined myself already in possession of what I sought, and the mind, a cunning trickster, rewarded me with fleeting euphoria. Hill speaks of autosuggestion, the deliberate feeding of the subconscious with images of your aim until the mind aligns with it. I fed myself with this relentless intensity, whispering my purpose with such ferocity that even my shadow seemed to lean toward it. And yet the Stoic within recoiled at every surge of impatience. Control, detachment, observation, these became my tools, my shield. I learned quickly that the law of definiteness of purpose was not a path paved with comfort or clarity, but a labyrinth of inner resistance. For every spark of inspiration, a shadow rose, a fear of failure, a doubt about capability, a corrosive whisper that perhaps the mind's promises were just illusions. It was here, in the crucible of desire versus restraint, that the first revelation struck. Clarity of purpose without mastery of self is meaningless. You can see the summit, feel it on your tongue, envision it in your veins, but without discipline, the climb becomes a spiral into obsession. By the 10th day, the experiment demanded more than mental alignment. It demanded emotional sovereignty. Hill insists that faith, when combined with desire, becomes a magnet for its object. But faith, untested, is a fragile force. My mind attempted to corral reality prematurely, to demand results, to feel entitled to miracles. And each time it faltered, the Stoic voice reminded me, you do not control the world. You only control yourself. The obstacle is the path. The resistance is the teacher. I began to understand that Napoleon Hill's laws were not about coercing reality, but about coercing the self, training it with such precision, with such unyielding alignment, that the subconscious mind no longer argued with your will. The first breakthrough was subtle, almost imperceptible, a moment of complete detachment while holding an unshakable desire. I wanted, yet I was calm. I sought, yet I did not grasp. I envisioned, yet I surrendered the outcome. In that paradox, I felt power, the quiet, unassailable authority of someone who knows that mastery begins not in the world, but in the mind. By the middle of the second week, patterns emerged. Every thought, every word, every act became a test. Hill writes of the subconscious mind as a garden. The seeds you plant, the images you entertain, the emotions you dwell upon, these determine the harvest. I began to track not just my ambitions, but my emotional responses, cataloging moments when desire tempted me toward impatience or distraction. Here, Stoicism proved indispensable. I learned to confront fear and frustration as if they were external forces, not internal weaknesses. A missed opportunity did not shake me. A fleeting doubt did not derail me. I began to cultivate an inner reservoir of calm, from which desire could draw without drowning in its own turbulence. Each day the duality sharpened. Hill's magnetism of faith and burning desire became a disciplined tool, while Stoic detachment became the lens through which it operated. I was no longer a slave to my wishes. I was an architect, constructing a reality that began with the invisible scaffolding of thought and emotion. Around the 15th day, the experiment demanded confrontation with the most dangerous adversary of all, the self-consoling mind. It whispered rationalizations, excuses, temptations to abandon rigor for comfort. 30 days is arbitrary, it said. Perhaps a lesser intensity is sufficient. Perhaps the universe is slow, indifferent, even cruel. And in response, I discovered the second revelation. The mind left unchecked will betray desire if it lacks discipline. Hill's principle is not merely a psychological exercise, it is a moral test, a mirror that reflects whether your ambition is genuine or superficial. True desire demands a fidelity that is terrifying, for it exposes weakness, laziness, and mediocrity in stark, unrelenting light. I realized that the moments of greatest internal struggle were also the moments of deepest growth. The clash between ambition and self-mastery became a forge, burning away delusions, tempering will, and crystallizing purpose. By consciously enduring this friction, I began to perceive reality not as a random collection of events, but as a reflection of my mental alignment. As the third week approached, a curious transformation took root. The law of definiteness of purpose, when merged with Stoic detachment, did not simply produce clarity of goal, it produced clarity of being. My thoughts, once scattered and reactive, became focused instruments. My emotions, once chaotic and unpredictable, became allies rather than enemies. I began to notice synchronicities, subtle alignments in the world that seemed to mirror my inner state. Hill calls this the law of attraction, yet it is far more nuanced. It is the world responding to the energy of disciplined thought coupled with unflinching, desire. But the Stoic truth remained ever present. The universe owes nothing. It responds, it mirrors, it tests, but it does not grant entitlement. And in that tension, I discovered a kind of awe, a quiet reverence for the invisible forces I had begun to wield, tempered always by the humility that comes from recognizing my own smallness in the vast orchestration of reality. By the 21st day, the practice had evolved into ritual. Each morning, I entered a state of meditation-infused visualization, allowing desire to rise without anxiety, imagination to play without indulgence. Each evening, I reflected with surgical precision, cataloging victories, errors, and emotional fluctuations. I was learning a lesson Hill mentions but few grasp, that persistence is not blind repetition, but a dialogue between intention and refinement, between imagination and action. The Stoic lens sharpened this dialogue. I did not cling to imagined outcomes. I did not despair at temporary setbacks. I learned to treat both failure and success as data points in a grand experiment, the experiment of self-mastery. My mind began to operate with an eerie clarity. Thoughts were no longer merely reactions. They were strategic alignments with purpose, subtle maneuvers in the silent war between potential and inertia. By the 25th day, the integration of these principles revealed their true power. Napoleon Hill speaks often of faith in oneself and one's purpose, a faith that is almost mystical in quality. But faith unanchored to emotional discipline is volatile, fleeting, and easily shattered by circumstance. The stoic component of my experiment, the cultivation of unshakable equanimity, see tit as ballast. My desire could now move through the world with force, yet without turbulence. Ambition burned brightly, yet without consuming reason. I felt a strange sense of invincibility, not in the sense of external power, but in the intimate, terrifying certainty that my internal landscape was no longer subject to chaos. Thoughts, emotions, and actions aligned in a seamless current. I was becoming, in Hill's language, a magnet, not for wealth alone, but for clarity, opportunity, insight, and influence. And I realized something even more profound. The real test of success is not accumulation, but transformation. The final days of the 30-day period were a mirror. They reflected the internal battle, the trials endured, the subtle victories that often go unnoticed. Every moment of frustration, every temptation to quit, every lapse of focus was counterbalanced by a deeper, more resilient presence, the awareness that success is born in the tension between desire and control, between fire and silence, between what you seek and who you become in seeking it. Hill and the Stoics converge here. He teaches the mechanics, the visualization, the faith. They teach the discipline, the detachment, the mastery over self. Alone, each is incomplete. Together, they form a law as ancient as reason, as modern as ambition, as terrifying as it is luminous. I emerged from this 30-day crucible changed, not because the world had bent to my will in dramatic external ways, but because I had bent the only thing truly under my control, myself. Desire no longer flickered like a candle in the wind. It blazed with the steadiness of a controlled flame. Thoughts no longer scattered, they sank, ruck with precision. Emotions no longer dictated action, they informed insight. I had become an experiment in living the law of definiteness of purpose, filtered through the lens of Stoic mastery, a living proof that human potential is limited only by the discipline and clarity with which we wield it. And yet, I know this is just the beginning. The law is relentless. Desire is insatiable. Mastery is infinite. But armed with this knowledge, I face the future not with fear, but with a calm, unwavering certainty that the mind, when disciplined, when aligned, can move mountains not by brute force, but by the quiet, unyielding power of clarity, faith, and reason. The days following the first 30 were not simply a continuation. They were a descent, a deepening, a confrontation with the unseen architecture of the mind. I had understood, in part, the potency of desire fused with purpose, yet I knew the mind was a labyrinth that could never be fully mapped, only navigated. Napoleon Hill warns of the slumbering forces of the subconscious, those unseen currents that, if aligned, can elevate the individual to the highest echelons of achievement, but if neglected, can drag him into ruin. The Stoics, centuries before, had whispered similar truths, that reason untempered by passion is cold and ineffective, while passion untempered by reason is volatile and destructive. And in this delicate balance, I found myself walking a razor's edge, where ambition and restraint danced like shadow and flame. It was here, in this silent crucible, that the mind reveals its deepest, most terrifying truths. The thoughts you tolerate, the impulses you ignore, the subtle lies you tell yourself, they ape reality far more profoundly than any external circumstance. I began to experiment with the power of deliberate thought, a discipline Hill calls autosuggestion, but I layered it with Stoic observation. Each thought was a tool, each visualization a precise instrument of internal alignment. I did not merely imagine success. I dissected it. What would it truly feel like to achieve my purpose? What emotions would accompany that reality, and which of those were fleeting illusions of gratification? The mind, left unchecked, confuses desire with the illusion of possession, and I discovered that the first mastery is always over perception. I would sit for hours in stillness, eyes closed, yet every nerve alert, constructing a reality in vivid cinematic detail. I imagined the texture of success, the weight of responsibility, the subtle tugs of fear and elation, and then, with equal intensity, I observed my responses with stoic detachment. Each surge of impatience became a lesson. Each flicker of doubt became a data point. The experiment was no longer about achieving external objectives. It was about forging the mind into an instrument so precise that desire and action would flow as one. The challenge intensified when the subconscious began to rebel. Thoughts I had ignored for years, impulses buried beneath polite routines, fears once dismissed as irrelevant, they all surfaced with uncanny clarity. Hill emphasizes persistence, the refusal to abandon a purpose, yet persistence alone is insufficient. Without emotional discipline, persistence becomes stubbornness, obsession, or anxiety. I had to observe my mind as if it were both my ally and my adversary. Stoicism provided the method of OD, see the fear, see the doubt, acknowledge the desire, and act without being acted upon. I realized that the greatest battlefield is not the marketplace, the competition, or the world of opportunity, but the unseen inner theater where thoughts, emotions, and impulses collide. Every victory, then, is not a moment in the external world, but a conquest of internal chaos, a calibration of mental energy toward a single, unwavering purpose. By the second week of this extended practice, I noticed subtle shifts in perception. Opportunities that once appeared random or scarce now seemed to flow toward me, not through magic, but as a reflection of internal alignment. Hill writes that the subconscious mind cannot distinguish between reality and vividly imagined thought. It acts as if the images it harbors are true. I began to inhabit a world in which success was inevitable, and yet, the Stoic principle reminded me constantly, the world owes nothing. Desire alone is insufficient. Action, tempered by reason, persistence, and detachment, is the crucible in which the unseen becomes manifest. I became acutely aware of the moments when desire wanted to leap ahead of discipline, when imagination sought to seduce action into recklessness. I learned to breathe through these moments, to watch the mind's turbulence with the calm of a sentinel observing the horizon, and in that calm the power of intention crystallized. Desire, observed and disciplined, becomes irresistible. By the third week, the process demanded what can only be described as emotional alchemy. Hill emphasizes faith, the inner conviction that your purpose is already realized in some invisible dimension, yet faith unchecked. By self-mastery is naive, fragile, prone to collapse under adversity. I realized that true faith is inseparable from reason, from the Stoic practice of separating what is within your control from what is not. The desire burned, but I remained unmoved by fear, impatience, or distraction. When setbacks arose, delays in projects, faltering communications, unexpected obstacles, I observed without attachment, adjusting my mental alignment without panic, without desperation. The fusion of Hill's law and Stoic detachment revealed a profound truth. Emotional calm does not diminish desire, it magnifies it, making its influence on reality far more precise and potent. I began to feel the subtle gravitational pull of the universe responding, not in dramatic bursts, but in quiet, almost imperceptible nudges. Doors opening, conversations aligning, timing coinciding with a precision that could only emerge from the orchestrated interplay of thought, emotion, and discipline. This period also revealed the true cost of unbridled desire. The mind, when trained toward a single purpose, will discard illusions, expose weaknesses, and demand absolute honesty. I confronted the most uncomfortable truths about myself, motivations rooted in ego rather than purpose, fears hidden beneath layers of rationalization, laziness camouflaged as strategic rest. Each revelation was a crucible of discomfort, a moment when the mind must either yield or sharpen. Hill writes of the necessity of self-confidence, yet he is clear, confidence divorced from disciplined reflection is arrogance. I learned to cultivate a confidence that is quiet, rooted, and unshakable, emerging not from vanity, but from the relentless alignment of thought and action. And it was here, in these moments of confrontation with my own imperfections, that I understood the deeper promise of the law: Success is inseparable from self-mastery. They are not sequential, but simultaneous. By the fourth week, my perception of time itself had altered. Moments became intensely charged, not with stress, but with focus. I experienced Hill's concept of organized planning in its purest form, not as a checklist or strategy, but as a mental architecture in which each thought, each decision, each action was deliberately aligned with purpose. The Stoic principle of living in accordance with nature, the acceptance of circumstance while acting with virtue, served as a stabilizing force. I was no longer impatient for external validation. I measured progress in the refinement of my own faculties. The world responded in reflection, subtle alignments, people acting in synchrony with my intentions, opportunities manifesting as if the mind's clarity had become a magnet. Yet every success was a lesson in humility. Hill's laws promise power, but they demand discipline. The Stoics promise peace, but only through rigorous self-examination. I was beginning to see that mastery is not comfort. It is the relentless cultivation of inner authority. By the 25th day, I had internalized a principle that is rarely articulated with sufficient gravity. The mind does not create success merely by thinking. It does so by synthesizing clarity, emotional sovereignty, and relentless alignment with purpose. Desire fuels motion. Imagination shapes vision. Faith anchors belief, but discipline, self-control, and reason determine the trajectory. Hill's teaching of autosuggestion had become a framework for daily rehearsal, while Stoicism provided the lens for filtering impulsivity and fear. Every decision became a deliberate act, every reaction a conscious choice. I began to notice that moments once filled with indecision, frustration, or anxiety now carried a quiet, almost imperceptible authority. I was shaping reality, not through force, but through the orchestrated precision of an aligned mind. The final days of this extended practice crystallized the most profound insight, that the fusion of Hill and Stoic philosophy is not merely a tool for material success, but a pathway to transformation. Desire, when disciplined, becomes pure intention. Imagination, when tempered by observation, becomes foresight. Faith, when anchored in reason, becomes unshakable. I had glimpsed the mechanics of manifestation, not as magic, but as the inevitable consequence of a mind aligned in purpose, controlled in emotion, and unwavering in belief. Every obstacle became a teacher, every failure a mirror, every fleeting doubt an opportunity to sharpen clarity. I began to understand that this is the law of life itself. The inner world precedes the outer. The disciplined mind precedes achievement, and the convergence of ambition and serenity is the crucible in which human potential is realized. By the 30th day, the experiment concluded not with fanfare, but with a profound stillness. The world outside had not necessarily changed dramatically. Wealth, recognition, or achievement were not instantaneously granted. But within, a transformation had occurred so deep that no external measure could capture it. I had become a practitioner of a law older than any text, a law both terrifying and luminous, that desire, when fused with unwavering purpose and disciplined by reason, is unstoppable. Hill had provided the mechanism. The Stoics had provided the framework for endurance, observation, and emotional sovereignty. Together they revealed a truth few dare to acknowledge. Success is not a reward. It is the inevitable consequence of mastery over the self, a transformation that radiates outward into every interaction, every decision, and every moment of life. The 30 days were complete, but the journey had only begun. As the 30-day crucible receded into memory, I began to perceive the world through a lens sharpened by deliberate vision. The first 30 days had taught me to confront the mind's turbulence, to discipline desire, to cultivate faith anchored in reason, and to observe the self with relentless honesty. Yet vision, the kind that draws the invisible into form, requires more than clarity of purpose. Vision demands intimacy with the unknown, a willingness to walk into uncertainty with both fire and silence. Napoleon Hill speaks of the imagination as the workshop of the mind, the engine where thought becomes reality. I found that the Stoics, centuries before, had whispered the same lesson in different language. Reason, when aligned with virtue and exercised, teach foresight, transforms circumstance into opportunity. To merge these truths is to enter a mental state where desire, reason, and imagination are not separate currents, but a single river flowing toward inevitability. In the early days following the experiment, I began to craft a mental map of success, not a checklist, not a strategic plan, but a living, breathing architecture of intention. Each action I took, each choice I made, was measured against this internal blueprint. Hill emphasizes definiteness of purpose, the act of declaring a singular objective and saturating the mind with it until all thought, feeling, and action converge. I realized, however, that definiteness alone is insufficient if not coupled with the Stoic discipline of detachment. Desire must burn, yet the mind must remain cool, observing each step as a chess master anticipates the opponent's moves without attachment to the pieces themselves. In this tension between fire and calm, between hunger and observation, the mind achieves a rare state of alchemy. It becomes both magnet and anchor, drawing toward itself the circumstances aligned with purpose, yet remaining unmoved by temporary turbulence or external judgment. Belief, I discovered, is the engine of this alchemy. Hill writes extensively about faith, the conviction that your purpose is already realized, that the unseen is as tangible as the visible. But faith, without self-mastery, is prone to distortion, to reckless optimism that blinds rather than illuminates. The Stoic discipline teaches the converse, to accept reality as it is, to act virtuously within it, and to surrender outcomes not in despair, but in measured detachment. By merging these principles, I cultivated a faith that was both unyielding and tempered, a belief so internalized that no external circumstance could shake it. Each morning I rehearsed the vision in my mind's eye with cinematic detail, sensing every texture, emotion, and nuance. Each night I reflected with Stoic rigor, examining impulses, dissecting emotional reactions, and calibrating thought with precision. The result was not merely confidence, but a quiet authority, a recognition that the mind, aligned with purpose and disciplined by reason, can bend reality without breaking itself. Persistence, the hallmark of Hill's teachings, revealed itself in a deeper, more nuanced light. Many perceive persistence as repetition, as stubborn adherence to action. But real persistence is not mechanical. It is a dialogue between intention and refinement. It is the capacity to endure failure, disappointment, and resistance without surrendering the core vision. I began to understand that obstacles are not adversaries but mirrors, reflecting the state of the mind and revealing areas that demand refinement. Each failure, each delay, each misalignment became an opportunity to sharpen focus, to strengthen emotional resilience, to observe desire without attachment. The Stoic principle here is subtle yet profound. We cannot control externals, but we can control perception, reaction, and alignment of thought. Hill provides the vehicle, but Stoicism provides the guidance to navigate it without succumbing to the turbulence of emotion or distraction. By the second week of this deeper exploration, I noticed a curious phenomenon. The mind began to organize reality itself. Opportunities previously invisible or ignored became apparent. Conversations led to insights, challenges revealed pathways, coincidence became pattern. Hill calls this the law of attraction, yet it is more accurately described as the natural consequence of a mind aligned in purpose, refined through deliberate thought, and disciplined in emotion. Stoicism tempers this process, reminding that the world is indifferent and that the mind must not cling to outcome, even as it exerts influence. Desire, clarity, imagination, and discipline fused into an internal engine capable of acting upon the world with subtle, almost imperceptible precision. The mind becomes both architect and magnet, shaping reality without force, drawing circumstance into alignment through sheer alignment of internal energy. Emotional mastery emerged as the next frontier. Hill speaks of autosuggestion and the need to saturate the subconscious with the image of success, but I found that saturation without discernment can backfire, producing obsession, impatience, and volatility. The Stoic practice of observation without attachment became indispensable. I learned to feel desire as a flame, to nourish it without letting it consume, to acknowledge fear and doubt without surrendering authority. Emotional mastery in this context is not suppression but alignment. It is the capacity to let the fire burn brightly while moving through the world with a calm, unshakable poise. Here, the mind begins to operate with near supernatural clarity. Thoughts are no longer chaotic, they are instruments. Emotions are no longer reactive, they are allies. Desire becomes not a force to be chased, but a current to be directed. By the third week, the subtle interplay between imagination and reason crystallized into strategy. I could see paths unfolding before me, not as linear sequences, but as a web of possibility, each strand connected to my internal state. Hill emphasizes the necessity of organized planning, of converting vision into actionable steps. Yet he also cautions that the subconscious interprets repeated images and emotions as reality. I realized that by coupling deliberate planning with emotional discipline, I could precondition both the mind and circumstance. Every action, conversation, and decision became a deliberate act of alignment. The Stoic lens ensured that even when external outcomes diverged from expectation, the internal engine remained undisturbed, recalibrating and adjusting without panic or despair. The world was no longer a source of anxiety, but a responsive field, a reflection of disciplined, purposeful thought. Persistence took on a new dimension in this phase. It was no longer merely continuing action in the face of adversity. It became refinement under resistance. Each obstacle revealed a gap between desire and discipline, between imagination and reason, between belief and action. Hill stresses that the person who wins is the one who refuses to quit. But I began to understand that refusal to quit is meaningless without the precision of inner alignment. Persistence, when fused with Stoic discipline, becomes not stubbornness but adaptive endurance, a capacity to endure, observe, and refine simultaneously. The mind transforms from a passive vessel into a living instrument, capable of negotiating reality while remaining anchored in purpose. By the 21st day, the experiment had begun to shape not only thought and action, but identity itself. The distinction between who I was and who I sought to become began to blur. Hill speaks of constructive imagination as the faculty through which one shapes destiny, yet I found that imagination untempered by detachment can create illusions of self rather than reality. Stoicism provides the corrective, constant self-observation, humility, and acceptance of truth. By merging these principles, I discovered a new form of self, one whose identity is inseparable from purpose, yet unbound by external circumstance, one whose emotional stability fuels ambition rather than obstructing it. This identity is not a mask or a projection. It is a crucible-hardened integration of desire, discipline, and clarity. A living demonstration of what Hill calls mental equivalent made real. By the 25th day, I could sense the final layer of transformation taking hold, the quiet yet undeniable manifestation of intention in reality itself. Hill teaches that the subconscious acts upon the images it holds, drawing external circumstances in alignment. I experienced this not as coincidence, but as pattern. Opportunities, insights, relationships, and timing aligned with an eerie precision reflecting the internal clarity I had cultivated. Stoic detachment prevented elation or fear from disturbing this alignment. I could act decisively without grasping, pursue vigorously without desperation, and adapt without losing the magnetic pull of intention. Desire had become fluid yet precise. Imagination had become directed, and faith had become unshakable. The mind had become both map and compass, both engine and anchor. The final days of this deep explorat Ion revealed the ultimate lesson that human potential is constrained not by external circumstance, but by the discipline, clarity, and integration of mind and emotion. Hill provides the mechanics, the laws, and the framework for intentional creation. Stoicism provides the architecture for endurance, observation, and self-mastery. Together, they reveal a truth as profound as it is simple. Desire without discipline is chaos. Discipline without desire is inertia. Alignment of the two produces inevitable manifestation. The fusion of vision, belief, persistence, emotional mastery, and stoic detachment creates a state of being that is both creative and controlled, fiery yet silent, ambitious yet serene. A state in which human potential is not a hope, but a living reality. By the 30th day of this extended journey, I understood that the experiment had transformed more than my daily practice. It had reshaped perception, action, and identity. I had learned to inhabit a space where the mind is the ultimate instrument, where desire is tempered by reason, and where faith is inseparable from emotional sovereignty. Hill and the Stoics, working in concert, had revealed a law that transcends circumstance, wealth or fame, the law of inner alignment, the principle that the individual who masters thought, emotion, and purpose commands both reality and self. The world itself had not dramatically altered in obvious ways, yet every interaction, every opportunity, every outcome was subtly, profoundly different. The mind, aligned, disciplined, and focused, had become a force. Silent, inevitable, and transformative, the days that followed were a test of endurance, not of the body, but of the mind's capacity to sustain clarity under the weight of unrelenting intention. I realized that vision alone, however vivid, is powerless without the scaffolding of discipline. Napoleon Hill teaches that the human mind, when saturated with a single purpose, becomes a magnet, drawing to itself the forces and circumstances necessary for its realization. But the Stoic principle whispered a counterpoint that was equally vital. The mind must remain unmoved by circumstance, observing without attachment, accepting without surrender. The tension between these two currents, desire that burns, detachment that steadies, became the field in which true transformation is forged. To pursue a purpose with fervor, yet move through the world with calm authority, is to walk the narrowest of paths. It is to cultivate power without chaos, fire without destruction, desire without desperation. I began to observe myself with a new intensity. Every impulse, every fleeting thought, every subtle emotional fluctuation was a message from the mind, a signal of alignment or deviation from purpose. Hill emphasizes autosuggestion as a tool to impress desire upon the subconscious, but I discovered that unchecked, the subconscious can mimic obsession, producing illusions of progress that dissolve under reality's scrutiny. The Stoic discipline, however, provided a lens for refinement. Observe the mind, acknowledge the desire, but act without impulsivity. I developed rituals of mental calibration, periods of intense visualization followed by deliberate reflection, moments of fiery intention followed by measured detachment. In this rhythm, I found a strange, almost sacred balance. The mind became both weapon and shield, force and foundation, flame and stillness. By the second week, the subtle architecture of influence and manifestation revealed itself. Hill speaks of the law of attraction as if it were a cosmic magnet, yet I began to perceive it differently. It is the natural resonance between inner clarity and outer circumstance. When the mind is aligned, disciplined, and unwavering, it emits a frequency, subtle yet palpable, that draws toward it the events, people, and opportunities that match its intensity. I noticed conversations shifting, coincidences multiplying, challenges aligning with solutions I had rehearsed mentally. But the Stoic principle remained indispensable. These manifestations are not entitlements, not proofs of favor, but reflections. Detachment ensures that one does not become addicted to outcomes, does not surrender the inner calm for the sake of ephemeral triumphs. Desire fuels creation. Detachment preserves sovereignty. Together, they transform potential into reality without compromising composure. Emotional discipline, I discovered, was the hidden fulcrum of this process. Desire, untempered, produces impatience, anxiety, and scattered effort. Faith, unanchored, becomes delusion. Hill's teachings on the subconscious mind are precise. It acts on the images it holds, yet it is sensitive to emotional tone. I learned to cultivate a controlled intensity, a flame of desire contained within the coolness of observation. Each day I would rehearse the vision, not with frantic yearning, but with a measured, almost ritualistic focus, allowing the mind to absorb the image fully. Then I would step back, as a Stoic might, observing without clinging, reflecting with, judgment. In this space, desire transformed from a volatile force into a directed current capable of shaping reality without consuming the self. By the third week, the experiment demanded confrontation with one of the mind's most insidious adversaries, self-deception. The mind is clever. It can rationalize half measures, mask laziness as strategy, disguise fear as prudence. Hill warns that only persistent, deliberate action aligned with a clear purpose will yield results. I discovered that discipline is not merely a matter of habit. It is a form of radical honesty. Each deviation from intention, each lapse in observation, each surrender to distraction was cataloged not as failure, but as data. The Stoic method teaches the same rigor. Examine each action, detach from judgment, correct without self-punishment. Through this relentless scrutiny, I began to see patterns of thought and behavior that had previously gone unnoticed. Desire, unchecked, seeks escape. Discipline demands confrontation. The mind, when faced with such clarity, either aligns or resists, and resistance is the crucible in which mastery is forged. By the 21st day, a transformation was palpable. The distinction between planning and action began to dissolve. Hill's emphasis on organized planning merged seamlessly with Stoic practice. Each choice, each step, each interaction became a deliberate expression of aligned intention. I was no longer reacting to the world, I was shaping it, not through force, but through subtle influence, through the gravitational pull of consistent thought, disciplined emotion, and clear purpose. I noticed the smallest details of life reflecting this inner alignment. Conversations that once seemed inconsequential now carried opportunity. Challenges that once seemed overwhelming now provided insight. The mind, disciplined and focused, became both filter and amplifier, discerning what is essential and magnifying its effect in the external world. Desire itself took on a new quality. Hill teaches that desire, when sufficiently intense, becomes irresistible to the subconscious, transforming intention into reality. I learned that the intensity of desire is magnified not by obsession, but by calm concentration. Fire contained within discipline burns with a force that cannot be extinguished. Each day I experienced moments of profound clarity, where the vision of success was not just an image, but a palpable reality, a texture, a presence in the mind that guided action without coercion. The Stoic principle of detachment ensures that this intensity does not collapse into desperation or volatility. Desire becomes a tool, not a torment, a compass, not a chain. By the 25th day, the fusion of Hill and Stoic principles revealed its deeper psychological effects. The mind begins to operate as a singular instrument of purpose. Thoughts, emotions, and actions are no longer fragmented or reactive. They converge in a precise, almost mathematical alignment. Hill's teachings on faith and autosuggestion are not mystical, but procedural. Saturate the mind with clarity and belief, and the subconscious will orchestrate outcomes. Stoicism ensures that this orchestration does not fracture under stress or disappointment. The mental state is one of quiet, confident authority. Challenges are approached as experiments, setbacks as feedback, and progress as the inevitable reflection of internal alignment. The mind, disciplined and aligned, begins to act as a magnet, attracting circumstance not through luck, but through resonance. The final days revealed perhaps the most profound lesson, that the true power of the law of definiteness of purpose is transformational, not transactional. Hill often speaks of wealth, success, and achievement, but the deeper promise is internal clarity of mind, sovereignty over emotion, and precision of intention. The Stoic lens illuminates this promise. External outcomes are reflections, not masters. The 30-day experiment was no longer a test of achievement, but a test of identity and mastery. I discovered that the person aligned with purpose, disciplined in thought, and sovereign in emotion is unshakable, unassailable, and profoundly influential, not because of external circumstances, but because of the unyielding alignment of internal forces. This is the true law of success. It begins and ends within. By the 30th day, I could see the transformation in subtle ways. The mind that once wavered in distraction now maintains focus. The heart that once fluttered with anxiety now beats with measured rhythm. The imagination that once flitted from whim to whim now constructs with precision. Hill's principles provide the fuel: faith, desire, autosuggestion, visualization, and the Stoic discipline provides the engine and steering, reason, detachment, observation, and acceptance. Together they form a system not merely for achieving goals, but for redefining the very architecture of the self. I realize that success is not an endpoint, but a process of constant refinement, a dance between ambition and serenity, between desire and detachment, between the unseen currents of the mind and the visible world of action. The experiment left me with a clarity that was almost frightening in its intensity. The mind, once scattered and reactive, is now a focused instrument. The emotions, once volatile and unpredictable, are now calibrated allies. The vision, once abstract and distant, is now an intimate, tactile force guiding every decision and action. Hill teaches that human potential is limited only by the mind. Stoicism ensures that the mind remains aligned, disciplined, and resilient. The fusion of these philosophies creates a state in which obstacles are opportunities, setbacks are lessons, and success is not luck, but the inevitable reflection of an ordered, disciplined, and inspired consciousness. Desire, faith, imagination, reason, and detachment converge into a single unstoppable force, a force that acts silently, powerfully, and without fanfare, reshaping reality as surely as the sculptor shapes clay. By the time I entered the 5th week of this experiment, the landscape of the mind had shifted in ways I could not have anticipated. What began as a conscious effort to test Napoleon Hill's singular law of definiteness of purpose had evolved into an all-consuming refinement of perception, intention, and emotional sovereignty. Every day became a crucible, every thought a test, every interaction an opportunity to measure alignment. Hill had promised that desire, when definitively focused, becomes magnetic, yet I discovered that magnetism alone is insufficient. It is discipline, emotional detachment, and the orchestration of thought and imagination that transform desire from a flickering possibility into a tangible current of influence. The Stoic principle, ever present in my consciousness, reminded me that the external world owes nothing, and that power is revealed not through the sway of circumstance, but through mastery of the self. It is in this subtle, almost invisible domain that real authority takes root. I began to notice an eerie precision in the unfolding of events. Opportunities that had once appeared random, fleeting, or trivial now bore unmistakable significance. Conversations, delays, chance encounters, all of them aligned in ways that mirrored the clarity of my inner vision. Hill calls this the law of attraction, but it is better understood as a reflection of internal alignment projected into the world. The mind, when saturated with desire, faith, and clarity, and tempered with reason and detachment, becomes a magnet of circumstance, drawing toward itself the threads of reality that correspond to its internal architecture. Yet, at no point did I mistake these alignments for certainty. The Stoic discipline ensured that external outcomes were observed without attachment, evaluated without vanity or despair, and integrated into the ongoing refinement of thought and action. To act with purpose while remaining unattached is to wield power without being consumed by it, a paradox that reveals the essence of mastery. Persistence, once a concept confined to mechanical repetition, had taken on a new dimension. It was no longer about stubbornly pushing forward through adversity. It became adaptive, conscious, and precise endurance. Every obstacle revealed a hidden misalignment within the mind. Every setback exposed an unexamined fear or lapse in discipline. Hill's law demands that we persist until the subconscious mind aligns fully with our conscious intention. Yet this alignment cannot occur if desire outruns discipline, if imagination overwhelms reason, or if faith dissolves under the pressure of circumstance. The Stoic principle, ever vigilant, ensured that each moment of tension was met with reflection, not reaction, observation, not panic. Through this intricate dance of persistence and detachment, the mind begins to operate as a singular instrument of purpose, capable of bending circumstance with quiet inevitability. By the second week of this deeper practice, I felt the first subtle currents of transformation ripple through my perception of self. I began to see that the person I had been, the one who hesitated, who vacillated, who sought comfort over clarity, was no longer the operative force in my life. Hill's teachings on the subconscious mind emphasize that what the mind holds consistently, it manifests consistently. Stoicism teaches that the self must be disciplined, that impulses are to be observed, not obeyed, and that external circumstances are indifferent. Together, these philosophies form a crucible for identity itself. Desire, when disciplined, imagination, when refined, faith, when anchored in reason, all coalesce into a new entity, one whose identity is inseparable from purpose, yet unshackled by ego or external validation. The transformation is profound, subtle, and irreversible. The individual becomes a vessel of focused intent, capable of acting decisively while remaining unshaken by chaos. Emotion, long a turbulent force within me, became an ally rather than an adversary. Hill teaches that emotions, when infused with desire and faith, empower the subconscious mind. The Stoic discipline teaches that emotions, unexamined, will dominate reason and distort perception. By merging these truths, I discovered a rhythm of emotional calibration. Allow passion to fuel creativity and action, but observe it with detached vigilance, refining intensity without yielding to excess. Desire burned, yet it did not consume. Faith soared, yet it did not cloud judgment. Imagination expanded, yet it did not fracture perception. The mind in this disciplined state begins to perceive reality with an almost clairvoyant clarity. Patterns emerge, opportunities are recognized instantly, and the flow of action becomes anticipatory rather than reactive. This is the psychology of mastery, the fusion of emotion, reason, and intention into a single coherent force. By the third week, the subtle mechanics of manifestation became undeniable. Hill writes of the law of autosuggestion, the deliberate feeding of the subconscious mind with images of the desired state until it becomes a living reality within. I discovered, however, that autosuggestion alone produces only projection, not mastery. It is the convergence of desire, faith, emotional regulation, and stoic detachment that converts projection into influence, thought into tangible alignment, imagination into action. I practice this fusion relentlessly, saturating my subconscious with vivid, cinematic imagery of purpose, then stepping back in calm observation to allow the mind to reorganize without interference. The result was a quiet, almost imperceptible orchestration of circumstances that mirrored internal alignment. I began to sense the invisible threads connecting intention to outcome, the subtle ways in which a disciplined mind bends reality toward its design. Persistence and patience became inseparable companions in this stage. Hill emphasizes persistence as the refusal to abandon purpose. Despite adversity, I realized that persistence without discernment is foolish, and discernment without persistence is impotent. Stoicism provided the framework for patient endurance, teaching that obstacles are neither punishments nor denials, but reflections of internal alignment and invitations to refinement. I learned to approach every challenge as a diagnostic tool, a way to observe gaps between intention and execution, between desire and discipline, between vision and reality. In this interplay, the mind becomes a laboratory. Every action a measured experiment, every setback an opportunity to test and recalibrate the force of intention. True persistence, I discovered, is not blind effort. It is adaptive mastery over thought, emotion, and action in the service of a singular, unwavering purpose. By the 25th day, the integration of all principles, clarity of purpose, emotional mastery, disciplined imagination, faith, stoic detachment, and adaptive persistence produced a state of internal authority that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I was no longer a passive participant in the world. I had become a conduit of deliberate influence. The mind, organized, disciplined, and aligned, radiated intention into the field of reality, shaping circumstances without apparent effort. Hill's teachings provide the mechanics, the vision, the laws. Stoicism provides the compass, the ballast, the lens through which mastery is maintained under pressure. Together they reveal a fundamental truth. True power emerges only when desire is harmonized with discipline, when faith is tempered by observation, and when imagination is channeled through reason. In the final days of this phase, I confronted one last frontier, the subtle seductions of ego and attachment. Even with discipline and clarity, the mind can be tempted by the illusion of control, the lure of recognition, the seduction of imagined triumph. Hill emphasizes faith in oneself and in purpose, but without stoic vigilance, faith can mutate into arrogance, attachment into vulnerability. I practice deliberate humility, observing achievement without indulgence, progress without attachment, and desire without grasping. This was not surrender, it was sovereignty over self, the ability to pursue fiercely while remaining invulnerable to external sway. The fusion of Hill's visionary ambition with stoic equanimity had reached its apex. I was both magnet and observer, architect and sentinel, fire and calm. By the 30th day of this advanced stage, I had arrived at a state that defies conventional description. The mind, once fragmented and reactive, now functions as a precise instrument of purpose. Desire, imagination, and faith operate in unison, tempered by detachment, reason, and emotional control. The external world, while unpredictable and indifferent, now responds predictably to the alignment within. Opportunities, obstacles, insights, and connections all appear with a synchronicity that is both subtle and profound. Hill and Stoicism converge in this state. One provides the blueprint of success, the other the discipline to sustain it under the unpredictable weight of reality. The transformation is total. Thought, emotion, action, and identity converge into a singular, unstoppable force capable of shaping not only outcomes but the very perception of reality. This stage revealed a truth more profound than any achievement. Success is not measured in wealth, recognition, or accolades, but in the unshakable alignment of mind, purpose, and emotion. The individual who masters this state is unassailable, not because the world bends to their will, but because their internal architecture is invincible. Desire becomes fuel, imagination becomes strategy, faith becomes anchor, and detachment becomes the lens through which reality is navigated. Persistence, patience, and deliberate observation ensure that the mind continues to refine itself endlessly. This is the ultimate fusion of Hill and Stoicism, the creation of a self that is both a force of manifestation and a vessel of serenity. A mind that commands without attachment, that acts without fear, that achieves without compromising its own equilibrium. Have you ever considered that every moment you hesitate, every thought left unchecked, every desire unrefined, shapes not just your day, but the very architecture of your destiny? That the unseen currents of your mind, silent and relentless, are already arranging the blueprint of what you will become long before the world even notices? This is the terrain where true power and mastery reside, not in the applause of others, not in the accumulation of wealth, but in the sovereign command of your own consciousness. Napoleon Hill teaches that the mind, when charged with definiteness of purpose and saturated with faith, will draw toward itself every force necessary for its realization. The Stoics, millennia before, whispered the complimentary truth that external circumstance is indifferent, and the only true freedom, the only true power, resides in the mastery of thought, emotion, and action. It is here, in this convergence, that the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary. By the first week of this culminating stage, I realized that desire, though vital, is not enough. A fire without direction consumes and leaves ashes. Intention without discipline dissipates into distraction. The mind must be calibrated with precision, each thought weighed, each emotion observed, each impulse assessed. Hill's teachings provide the mechanism. Saturate the subconscious with your purpose. Saturate your consciousness with clarity. Insist upon alignment. The Stoics provide the stabilizer. Observe without clinging, act without being acted upon, and accept reality without surrendering your agency. Desire becomes a vector. Reason becomes the trajectory. And the mind becomes an engine that transforms vision into reality. I began to feel the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts that signal manifestation, patterns appearing in the world, opportunities lining up as if drawn by invisible strings, and challenges presenting themselves not as obstacles, but as confirmations that the mind was now operating as an instrument of influence rather than reaction. By the second week, emotional mastery had become not a practice, but a state of being. Hill emphasizes autosuggestion, the repeated impressing of the desired state upon the subconscious, yet the subtler lesson was revealed through Stoic discipline. The mind must not be hijacked by the transient, the seductive, or the destructive. Each day I rehearsed the vision of what I sought to eat with deliberate intensity, but I observed my own responses with detachment. Desire burned like a controlled flame. Fear arose, was acknowledged, and then released. Doubt whispered, was catalogued, and then discarded. The mind, trained in this dual practice, became a lens through which reality itself could be refracted, a force that attracts circumstance while remaining untouchable by it. This is the secret that Hill hints at, that the Stoics codified. The individual who masters internal currents commands the external with quiet inevitability. Persistence, as I entered the third week of this final stage, revealed itself in its purest, most potent form. Hill insists that those who persist in the face of adversity will ultimately prevail, yet true persistence is not mere repetition. It is adaptive, conscious, and precise endurance, tempered by the vigilance of Stoic detachment. I learned to interpret setbacks not as punishment or failure, but as diagnostic tools revealing the subtle misalignments between desire, discipline, and execution. Obstacles became mirrors, each one reflecting a flaw in my internal architecture, each one demanding attention, adjustment, and refinement. And when I acted in alignment with clarity and reason, the world responded with startling precision, doors opened, connections aligned, and the currents of opportunity flowed toward me with a rhythm that seemed preordained. By the 21st day, the fusion of all principles, desire, faith, imagination, emotional mastery, disciplined action, and Stoic detachment, produced a state of quiet, unshakable authority. The mind had become a magnet and a compass simultaneously. It drew circumstances toward it, yet remained unmoved by outcome. It projected intention, yet remained indifferent to external validation. Hill's law had transformed thought into influence. Stoicism had transformed influence into sovereignty. The integration of these forces was not a superficial skill, but a profound identity shift. The self that emerges from such disciplined alignment is capable of commanding reality while remaining untethered to it, of pursuing relentlessly without surrendering peace, of creating without being consumed by attachment. By the 25th day, I began to understand the final layer of mastery, the interplay between desire and detachment. Desire fuels motion, sparks creation, and defines vision. Detachment ensures that motion is deliberate, creation is sustainable, and vision remains unclouded. Dill describes the subconscious as the vehicle through which thought manifests. Yet without the Stoic filter, the subconscious can magnify fear, obsession, and impatience as much as it magnifies clarity, belief, and purpose. I developed the capacity to feel desire intensely, to pursue with ferocity, yet to remain unmoved by distraction, delay, or temporary defeat. The mind becomes both sharp and silent, a duality of power and poise that acts as if the world itself bends beneath its orchestration, though in truth it is only the reflection of inner alignment. By the 30th day, I had arrived at a mental state that defies conventional description. Hill and the Stoics had together revealed a law that operates beyond circumstance, beyond luck, beyond fear, the law of inner alignment. When thought, emotion, and action converge in disciplined harmony, the mind becomes a force that shapes reality without struggle, a consciousness that acts with precision, a self that commands destiny without arrogance. Opportunity, timing, insight, and action all align with a subtle inevitability, as if guided by an invisible hand. Yet at no point is the mind dependent on external conditions. This is the culmination of Hill's promise of success and the Stoic promise of self-mastery. Power without chaos, desire without desperation, achievement without compromise of inner peace. And now, here is the moment that transforms observation into action, thought into life. The call to mastery is immediate, relentless, and absolute. Understand this. The mind you inhabit today is already shaping the life you will inhabit tomorrow. Every fleeting thought, every unexamined desire, every reactive impulse is laying brick in the architecture of your future. The principles I have described are not abstract. They are tools, weapons, and maps. The path is clear. Define your purpose with ruthless clarity. Saturate your mind with the vision of it. Cultivate faith so intense it becomes unshakable. And temper desire with the unyielding discipline of observation, reason, and emotional mastery. Persist relentlessly and intelligently through obstacles, distractions, and doubt. Detach from outcome but never from action. Let the fire of ambition burn within you, and the stillness of reason guide it. In this duality, the impossible becomes inevitable. You are standing at the threshold of your own potential. The world will offer chaos, distraction, delay, and opposition, but none of it matters. What matters is the mind that observes, decides, and executes with absolute alignment. Hill teaches that the law of success is available to